Welcome, my friends, to the Sage Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, returning to the show are my very special guests, Elisa E. and Elana Freeland. Elisa is a survivor of the MKUltra mind control program. She has authored 2 books titled Our Life Beyond MKUltra, where Elisa details her involvement in the program. She offers a rare glimpse into how the dark world of trauma-based mind control created her multiple personality disorder, and how once programmed, she was used in government, military, intelligence, religious, and corporate organizations to carry out the occult agenda of control and domination through sex and murder. With tonight's show, Elisa will take us through her MKUltra deprogramming process and how that process must include an inner spiritual awakening in order to break out and defend against the forces of evil. Elana will then explain how the ionization of our atmosphere and environment is an integral part of the agenda to mind control the masses and create generic thinking and behaving human beings. We then wrap up with Elisa relaying her personal experiences with unseen forces and how these entities play an important role in mind control programs and the oppression of humanity. The pictures displayed during the slideshow for this interview are Elisa's personal collages depicting her inner struggles and thoughts as a survivor of government mind control. And to kick the show off, I asked Elana if she could give us an overview of MKUltra, and here is what she had to say.
A lot of Americans don't even know to this day, 70 years later, that one of the most nefarious programs that was born virtually with the CIA and the National Security Act of 1947, the year I was born, it is important and imperative to know about it because of what it has now become. We are not talking about a bad history that is over and done with. We're talking about something that is on the goose step march all the way through not just America either. Every country in the world is now having to deal with this remote electromagnetic mind control that really began in the technical sense with the Nazis in the camps during World War II, and then was brought to America under Operation Paperclip. Many engineers and, yes, rocket scientists, but more importantly, for how history has come since then, it was filled with psychiatrists, doctors who had done abominable things on inmates, and that would include Jews, Gypsies, people who were disabled, homosexuals, and even Germans, their own Germans. So we have to start there to understand that this technical aspect of mind control began in 1953 when everything got settled here. The records had been scrubbed of the Nazis, and they were all ensconced in our military bases, our hospitals, our mental health institutions, our universities, everywhere. And one of the things at the primary, in the front of the line for them was mind control. And this was very attractive to the PhDs that worked for the CIA and the FBI, with the idea that the Cold War now meant that the Soviets might take over, and there were rumors flying about the Soviets doing mind control experiments, etc. So it was really pushed into high gear by the paranoia of the time against communism. So this MKUltra began with cults. There were satanic cults here in the United States. There were very right-wing so-called Christian groups, Jewish groups. Many cults were tapped by the CIA for their children because their children had already been traumatized. Their personalities had already been split off for various functions that the cult needed. And so the CIA either leased or bought them outright and began with them. It also tapped its officers, and the military tapped its officers for their children. So this is not some small thing that happened in our checkerboard past. This is a horror beyond belief that parents would give their children, would sell their children like slaves to the intelligence agencies for the sake of saving us from communism. It's just unbelievable. So I want to make sure that people understand that this is where it began. And it is, though we had the Church Committee in 1975 and the Church Report, Frank Church from Idaho, saying that, yeah, gee whiz, this was bad. The CIA, oh, sorry, they burned most of their files, but we do have a few boxes of files. It's all over, kaput. They were bad, slap their hand, and on we go. That is not true. It simply went on and now is so sophisticated that soon we will not know the difference between the MKUltra of today and the singularity transhumanism movement. We will not know the difference.
So, Elana, when we say it's here today, some of the audience may not understand what that means. So, how is it out there today?
Well, I myself, I did a lot of research on MKUltra primarily because of the books I wrote, Sub Rosa America series, which is about a fictional history series about what has happened to this country since John F. Kennedy's assassination. But I have somehow, you know how destiny works. When you get involved in something, you begin to attract those people. I myself have met through various connections, but also just serendipitously in parking lots and supermarkets. I have met people who have been subjects of this terrible program, and some of them know it, some of them don't know it. How do I know it? Well, I've read so much and spent so much time going over things. I edited Elisa's books. I've edited Kathleen Sullivan's book. I mean, I really delved into this because I know evil when I see it, and I want to understand all the things that make it work so that these people that I encounter, I will be at my sharpest to help them in any way I can. And I would say if I were to think of how many people are MKUltra victims and survivors today, I'd have to begin with the number 100,000. And I'm sure that I'm not giving it its full due, but I can vouch for at least 100,000. And that's not counting the targeted individuals who are being used in experiments of weapons, electromagnetic weapons, so-called non-lethal weapons, to see how their brain can be controlled from a distance. And those, I think those are probably up close to the million mark. So this is a terrible evil, and we can't flinch from it. We can't turn our face from it because it makes us feel bad and we feel helpless. We've got to begin with knowledge is power. And I am a big proponent of that because I am stronger than ever now that I know as much as I do.
Now, what would the government or the CIA's endgame be with MKUltra, Elana? In other words, why are they doing this?
Well, I think Elisa can respond to that.
Total control. I know that sounds very general and a blanket statement, but my, I guess I'd really have to say my alters and now the highest part of me, which all of this is kind of, talked about this in the first broadcast about having, alternate personalities and also being very much aware and in a direct conscious relationship with the highest part of me, which is what drives the deprogramming process and all that. And I'd have to say that the combination of those, my understanding at this point is total control. But what's really, really even more insidious about it is, as Elana made reference to, it's a control that isn't going to be, most people I think of the Hollywood version, which is you're going to know that you're being controlled at some point, or it's going to all fall apart. It's going to look like an apocalypse or military law. And I'm not saying that those things aren't going to be incorporated into the public scene, but what I understand very, very clearly and have for years and predicted years ago was that they're going to take individuals and that person will wake up the next day and not know that they have been incorporated into the system remotely. And so I call it you're not going to know you no longer have a choice to wake up. Life will go on for you as it appears to have gone on. And that's the most basic general case. There's always going to be the extremes that are going to be used to create false flags and so on and so forth. But the general case is they're looking for control of the masses, that the masses have no idea they're under the control. They will wake up the next day and continue on with their life. The thoughts will be being pumped in. The ideas will be being pumped in. So, the idea that it's always going to be drastic, and I refer to it as, high school hijinks, where they're going to say, well, I'm going to make you pick your nose now. Ha, ha, ha. These are masterminds, okay? That's going on, but in some ways, I think that's being used. It's very real, and it's still very much torture, but I also believe it's being used to create a distraction, so that the really insidious control is you've got somebody in the Senate, okay, and they're passing bills for you. They're passing, and that's kind of a high level, but I'm talking, this is going to filter down into the general populace, the everyday Joe. Okay. So to me, it's complete and utter control without the public's knowledge that they personally, are under control. They can see someone else, but they don't know that their thoughts are being monitored and possibly influenced, and at the very worst, controlled.
So when we talk about something being pumped in, what are the tools that they are using in order to have that effect, in order to control the masses?
Well, I think probably Elana has a much, much better, not probably, I know she has a much better understanding due to her books and her research of the technology. But what I understand through my own downloads and so forth is that AI has been up and running for a long time. So, it's not a matter even at this point for everybody. I think there's still a lot of this going on where there's a guy or a girl or a woman sitting at a computer monitor and remotely working with individuals or small groups of people. But what I'm talking about is AI systems. Interactive AI systems that are handling what's coming back to them from the person and adjusting to whatever it needs to do.
Elisa, how does that transmission process work? In other words, there has to be some connection that the AI is utilizing in order to control thought or to control behavior. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I mean, there's actual tech out there that's being dropped in chemtrails and so forth. We talked about that in the first show, or Elana talked extensively about that, as far as this stuff is pretty much in all of us at this point. It's in our environment, it's in the ionosphere. It's, so if you electrify the atmosphere and this stuff is inside of us, what is it doing inside of us? Is it electrifying? Are we picking up the frequencies? That to me would be the technical side of it. But again, I refer to it as esoteric tech. We are living in a time where, and I don't know if it was ever any different from this, but in our technological age, we're living in a time where the esoteric is part of the tech and the tech is part of the esoteric. There's no delineation anymore. You can't say, well, this is black magic, but this is technology. They're one and the same. And we've talked a little bit about what's behind that there's been an ongoing, as far as I'm concerned, since man has been here, yeah. There's been an esoteric side. And I believe that there's been a cycling of the technology through the various civilizations. This is just how it looks this time. But to me, there's been a goal all along. And this is one of the closest at this point that they've come to achieving. In my personal opinion, this is a time where they're coming the closest to achieving their goal, and I don't know if they will or will not.
So what you're describing, Elisa, is a technology that is so far advanced that most people will not be able to get their heads wrapped around it. It will sound like science fiction to them. So maybe, Elana, I know you have done a lot of work and a lot of research into the technologies and the methods used to manipulate human thought and human behavior. So can you take us through that in some more detail?
Well, starting in the Cold War, the majority of PhDs influenced by Edward Bernays came to a conclusion that media would be number one. And the television was born. Of course, you know that the military had had the television years before we did, just as they had the cell phone years before we were allowed to have them. So the TV was born, NBC, ABC, CBS. They began to run shows feverishly, seeing, and I love it that they call it programming. So, you know, it's not like it was hidden from us, but we didn't know what programming meant. So that was the beginning, was media, and most important, visual media, not radio. Radio leaves you much freer than a visual representation. So they began there. And as time went on, the newspapers were taken over by the 70s. The CIA's Operation Mockingbird had taken over all the major media, including newspapers, magazines, etc. There were little tussles over that. Some people were not quite as bent as the CIA, but always came the story of the communists, the communists, the communists. So once the media had been completely taken over in the land of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, etc., then began the next phase. And of course, you know, it wasn't all linear. They were working on it all at all the same time. We had the rocket program. We had the space psychology programs. You know, what would you face in space? And there were a lot of covert things going on under that program, mind control things, MKUltra sub-projects. And gradually it came to where they realized that in order to really control the globe, they needed to get more energy, particular ions, from the ionosphere. And so that work has been going on easily since the early 60s to find a way to do that. But it wasn't until Bernard Eastland's 1987 patent, the first patent, that they began to see, yeah, we could do this. We could zap the ionosphere with phased array antennas, and we could, stimulate more ionized energy, draw it down along the magnetic lines of force into the magnetosphere and into our troposphere. And that's what they've finally done. However, to keep the atmosphere ionized, they have to use these chemtrails, and load them up with aerosols. That includes conductive metals. That also, there were others who jumped on that bandwagon and said, well, let's deliver nanobots. We're working in nanotechnology, and people are breathing the atmosphere, have them breathe in some of those nanobots, microprocessors, sensors, all on a nano scale, so that we can have access to everyone's nervous system. They jump past the blood-brain barrier, everyone's blood system. And let's check on disease too. Let's create a Morgellons creature, genetically engineer it, and stick it on one of those polymers that we're delivering in the chemtrails, and people will breathe that in. And so we can have a variety of experiments going here to, all of them heading toward this cyborg transhumanist future. So the thing where you have the nanobots in, and I know people don't understand this, is you can be pulsed. They can pulse entire populations. They can pulse cities. They can pulse one neighborhood in the city. They can pulse, yes, individuals' homes, but they can use the cell towers and other devices on the earth for that. But the pulsing of the nanobots is how the mind control is really going to happen, along with, and we're not going to leave the media out. I mean, most people I talk to, I don't know about you, Mike, but most people I talk to, they are completely conditioned by the media. So I don't see much thinking going on anymore, and thinking could have been a chance for consciousness to overcome this sort of droning being alike thing, this similarity. The idea of democracy is we're all, we're all the same. No, that isn't the meaning of democracy, but it appears to have become that. Politically correct opinions. I certainly have been ousted from the people that may look on the outside something like I think here in my town, because I'm the bearer of bad news. I'm the bearer of the news that, hey, we need to think our way out of this. We need to do something here. So there is this constant media drone behind it, and add to that the pulses at certain frequencies that are affecting our endocrine system, affecting our nervous system, and you begin to see the problem. And at this point, it's probably too late to throw that over. I certainly have no hope in coming that way, but I do have hope of coming in the back door, which now I have to say in America is consciousness, and to raise the consciousness of the public and explain to them how this works, so that the gears can get moving again in the old brain up there, so that people can begin to understand that. And I think Elisa would agree with me, consciousness is a great shield. It is something that makes you not as available to certain forces who are, as Elisa wonderfully put it over a year or two ago, the forces that are riding the tech into us. And that, I'm banking on that. That's the way I'm going.
Yeah, and Elana, to steal the title from your book, it's really a full spectrum approach, this attack on humanity and with the mind control. And I completely agree with regard to the media. It is a perpetual motion machine. It's the ace up their sleeve. And I am continually astonished whenever I have conversations with people that how narrow their perspective of their existence is. Yes. They have blinders and they have no peripheral vision. And of course, the approach and the tactic is to keep their consciousness buried so that they stay unaware, that they essentially are not even aware that they have a consciousness.
Yes.
And so I absolutely agree with all your points. And I also agree that the way out of this is we have to keep pushing until the wheels fall off, and to get people to realize that they have consciousness, because that is our ace up our sleeve.
Mm-hmm. Mike, it's so true. And what I'm seeing is, even in that process that Elana was describing and you're referring to, there's been a progression in that, in the sense that they've pushed farther and farther over the years, so that now this is, to me, the version of the setup for what we call transhumanism, singularity, all of us becoming enhanced humans and so on and so forth that can live for literally forever if you switch bodies long enough. They've pushed it farther over the years each time, so that now that extreme sounds reasonable.
Right.
It's not just, keeping us in a certain state. It's been accelerated so that transhumanism and singularity is the new religion. I mean, really, it's like a science religion. they've incorporated the esoteric and the tech and the science together in a way that is not the way that it ought to be, because we do need our intelligence and we need our spirit, but they're combining it, to me, in a very dark way that is about our demise. And moving from the as she said, pulsing into perhaps a house, when they want to create what I would still refer to as a high-level slave, then they're going to map that person's brain. In addition, they become then literally a slave to either a person or a group of people, an agency, a corporation, a religious organization, whoever owns rights to that person. So there's the en masse programming and takeover, but there's also always going to be the individual that is going to be doing their bidding 24/7. They will not have a private life.
I had a conversation today on Facebook, and it was with some young folks, I'm guessing in their 20s, and it had to do, well, the conversation finally wound up bumping into this whole Planned Parenthood harvesting of baby parts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to explain to these young folks that you really have to get your head wrapped around the fact that what a human being really is. And it was amazing to me that these young people would respond back to me by saying, well, Mike, it's legal. They can do that. And this is how jammed up people are.
Yeah.
Right? They will look at something and they'll say, well, there's a piece of paper here that somebody doesn't care much about humanity signed with maybe a fancy letterhead, and it says it's legal to do this.
Right.
Well, where is your moral and ethical code? Where is that core? Where's your soul? Where you take a step back and you say, this is patently wrong. You see, and that's the issue that we have, and that is conditioning. That is mind control. Because when you can take a look at a situation like that, and you can take a look at an organization that is indeed harvesting baby parts.
Right.
And your position is that it's okay. It's like buying chicken legs out of your supermarket. In other words, it's like going to the supermarket, going to the freezer section, buying some meat, and going to the checkout counter and going home.
Right.
That's how they are equating humanity. That's, in essence, how they are viewing themselves. And they probably don't even know that. It's very alarming to me. I have to be honest with you. And I know I'm kind of taking a little bit of a detour here, but I guess to me, it's a good example of the conditioning that's taking place and how many people are viewing what being a human is supposed to be about. And many people don't put humans very high in the pecking order of anything.
Exactly.
And it's very, very sad.
And I do. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And I think it's, if it is sidetracking, it's an important sidetrack because this is the extreme that they've taken us to. This is the place of, as you say, programming and conditioning that they've taken us to, so that whatever we're told, it's okay, because our humanity has been downplayed so much. It has been repressed. It has been pushed out in place of what you're talking about. And if that humanity, if that soul and that spirit is alive, it's abhorrent to you.
Right.
I watched that video, one of the videos, the one of the woman, sitting with this covert reporter or whatever he was. And I was devastated with everything I've been through. I was devastated that this was actually, this was actually there. It just reached into my heart and squeezed it. And I've had the same experience, just everyday, lovely, kind people who thought that it was a bit extreme, that we were upset about this, that this was this was about, aborted fetuses and so forth and on and on. And, one person I knew pretty well, and I just went off, on human trafficking and organ trafficking and how, and bless her heart, she was, came right around and said, you're absolutely right. I don't know what I'm talking about. I have no idea what I'm talking about. And I'm going to take a look and go into this. So, yeah, I think this is at the heart of everything that's happening, the state of human consciousness.
Right. When you equate humans to a box of cornflakes on a shelf in a supermarket, there is something dreadfully wrong with the construct of your thinking. And, and I know I'm probably going to get a lot of flame mail and hate mail for bringing this topic up. I'm sorry. Look, if you think and you believe that that type of activity, and I'm just picking on Planned Parenthood, but there's many other topics that I can hone in on. If you think that that's okay and you can shrug your shoulders and you could be apathetic and it's not a big deal, that's why we are in serious, serious trouble.
Yeah.
Mike, I've been saying this on Facebook. Do people do their history? Go and check the past of Planned Parenthood. It began in the eugenics movement
Exactly.
in the 1920s. So let's get straight. I know there's very nice people who want to help women who work for Planned Parenthood, but they better check their history of where that was born.
Yeah, and read up on Margaret Sanger.
Yeah.
Well, I know that I got us derailed there a little bit, but thank you for bearing with me. So I was wondering, Elisa, if maybe we could talk a little bit about the deprogramming. I did receive some emails from the last show where one email in particular, where there was a person that said, hey, look, I was in this program and I'd like to know more about how Elisa did her deprogramming. And so I guess the question is it a structured process or did you deprogram more based on trial and error?
Great. Yeah. I would love to say, and this is what I thought when I found the support, okay, in the two men that I met. My thoughts were that I was going to have a process. I was going to have safe place. I was going to have all these things. I was going to, work my way through it with someone else. And the truth of it was I was blindsided by the fact that first thing I really noticed was, and it began immediately, the day that I sat with them and shared with them. And these two men that I'm referring to were just amazing individuals who had worked with, and they were researchers. They had worked with other people like me. They knew a lot about mind control, but they were still in the learning process as well. Basically what they said is, you're not crazy. What you're telling us is we've heard it before, on and on. And what happened then, Mike, was that for the first time in, I'll say, our life, meaning myself and all the other parts and alter personalities within me, it was a safety moment of, you're not crazy. Someone here is listening. It's safe now. My father had passed several years before. One of my reprogrammers had passed several years before. So there were a lot of elements that went into this. And what I noticed first off, hindsight, okay, this began, and then I recognized sometime later what was happening, was a flood of alter memories surfaced. And I do mean 24/7. I bought almost immediately, within a couple of days, bought a little hand recorder. It was going on daytime. It was going on at night. I would come to in the middle of things and just record things that made absolutely no sense to me. I would get up in the morning. I would journal things. I'd have memories that had parts that didn't make any sense to me. They seemed surreal because I didn't understand what was happening in them. So really, the process began on me. It was almost like an assault from within. And really, honestly, I attribute it to the highest part of me of why I survived that process. I did not have a facility to go to. I didn't have even a safe home. I wasn't living with anyone. I was bouncing around. I was living out of a car. I had jobs, in certain towns, and I really used my alters to hold those, not only hold the jobs down, but get amazing references from the places I was going. So it was this bombardment of what I would realize later were several alter personalities and even fragment alters that realized it was safe to come forward. So I was flooded with things that I think many, many parts of me wanted to present, but I wasn't listening, or I wasn't able to hear them, or I just wasn't ready, what have you. So it became very, very much an assault. And one of the men was extremely helpful. We're still in touch, but I'd say for the first year and a half, it was critical that I had him in my corner. It's like you have to have somewhere to go with the information, recording it in a journal, recording it on tape. He would videotape me whenever I wanted. I would go to the town where he lived and spend a couple days, and we would just do a bunch of work. But it was really crucial for me to have someone. I often called him long distance, filled his voicemail. And he said, no problem, fill it up. And I would keep calling until he would empty it so that I could fill it up again. I mean, it just went on all day and night. And so I needed that outlet. And I knew that even if we couldn't talk, he told me, I promise you I'll listen to everything. And that helped. Somebody was listening to all of us. And then as time went on, and I just kept, at that point, he told me, there's a higher force in this world. Just keep focused on it. Know that it's going to get better. He kept telling me, I promise you, it will get better. Just hang on and hang in there. If I hadn't recorded it, I would say it was a blur. But I recorded it meticulously. And it began to make sense. I began to see patterns after, as the months went on, pieces that had come up 3 months ago and another piece that came up 3 months later all of a sudden fit together. I began to realize I'm not crazy. This is all real. This really happened to me. I had surveillance. People showing up, some scary situations, other situations, just potential mail handlers. And I was very resistant. Everything in me screamed to become involved with those people. And I held off. I prayed a lot or meditated on beautiful, loving, unconditional love. And it kept me from jumping in. And it was difficult. It was really difficult. And when I discovered who one person was, and cut that off spiritually and physically, like no contact, no interaction, they would shortly send someone else. So that went on for a while, but then that, kind of subsided. They realized I wasn't gonna bite anymore. There was not going to be a romantic benefactor to reprogram me and contain whatever it was I was going to bring forward. So there's a lot of elements to it, but for me, there wasn't any structure. I was, by the seat of my pants. I was hanging on, quite honestly, for the first 6 months. Suicide programs went off left and right. Self-destruct programs went off. Self-harm programs went off, and sometimes 4 and 5 at a time. And I was working and trying to look like I was a natural part of society during all this. I mean, literally, I had jobs. I was in retail, so every once in a while I'd have to just go lock the door when no one was around and go in the bathroom and curl up in a ball and sob until I could get up and come back out, But that is the other side of having the altars, in that I had, for example, one that I called the perfect employee, and she literally took over. It was a natural thing, and sometimes I would kind of come to 2 hours later, and everybody's giving me accolades on what a great job I'm doing. So wow. It is almost comical. I can almost write a comedy now, but back then it was terrifying. It was exhausting, and it was an ongoing process. And as I pieced things together, as things began to make sense to me, I began to get stronger. And throughout this, I relied on what I call that unconditional love. I couldn't pray to a God or a Messiah or a guru. I'd had masters my whole life, and that just didn't fit. But I knew that there was this magnificence that I had moments of throughout my life. I didn't even know what to call it. And when this man said, he said, just think of a creative energy, all the beauty that you do know of in the world. And I just started working with that until it became an actual daily conscious interactive relationship with this force of absolute beauty and unconditional love.
Now, how long ago, Elisa, did this take place? Your awareness that I'm getting these flood of memories, these fragments. Was it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Well, actually, things came through throughout my whole life. I have memories of even in childhood, some things breaking through on through the years, occasion here and there, but I was heavily programmed, heavily handled. So nothing could really take for long, before even my own programming. I have alters that are able to jump up when that happens. That's their sole purpose, is to come up and take over so that doesn't go any further. So I didn't just have to have a handler present, but as the remote stuff began, and I do believe for me that the remote stuff was implemented in the 80s, because I had very clear memories that I didn't understand of me switching alters without a handler present. I was on my own. I was out on task and I'm switching alters. And there's the entity aspect to that, but I believe the entities were at that point riding the technology that was being used to control me. And that's because of my affiliations, how I was brought up in the MKUltra. I know for a fact that there were certain military and intelligence, community was involved in my programming. So it broke through all the time, but I would say in my early 30s, I began to realize that, something really, really wrong in a way that I can't figure out how I could be doing these other things and have the life that I think I have. So it was there all along and just got stronger. And then it wouldn't be, I'd say in my early to mid 30s, and then it took me a good almost 15 years to actually get help. I started looking, and of course I was still programmed and used during that time as well. So it was really like being caught in the maze, and I couldn't see what the maze looked like. I was on my own.
Now, how would they activate remotely an aspect or an alter of you?
Well, I can't say specifically what the tech is. I have it from the version of myself and my alters. I have a memory, for example, of driving into a motel parking lot, and I'm sitting in the car and I see two doors, and one of them's kind of embarrassing. One of them was used to switch alters was masturbation. And I would begin that just sitting there as if I'm tranced out, have no emotion, have no sexual feelings, nothing. Begin that process, and the next thing I know, I'm gone. Okay, and somebody else took over, and I would go in. I have memories of just being in locations, going into a small storage closet and switching and feeling, interestingly enough, as if there was a male there with me. There was someone with me, but there was no one physically present. And associating that now with there being an entity / tech being pumped in, and the next thing I know, I black out. And then time later, I would get the report of what happened after that from other alters. That may come months down the road. So in other words, I'm getting the bits and pieces over the years from various alters. Maybe one alter shows me a small segment. It may be a year later before I find out what happened. And then I piece it together and realize that I was either remotely or entity triggered into another alter who took over at that point.
So situations and circumstances can be a trigger.
Yes. And, I looking back at it, and this is a deduction on my part, is that I'm, the first alter presentation, if I'm on an on task, I'm already in an alter that's taking me to a location. So something's already been set off. At that point, I have several memories, more than several, God, probably in the hundreds at this point, where I'm in one alter and now I have the piece of being triggered into another alter. And it's clear to me that this is an esoteric tech. It's coming from outside of me, and I'm already set up internally. That's the part I think is there's a whole structure inside, a hierarchy set up inside. And what they're doing is through the tech, through the entity, tapping in and triggering the inside. That's all set to go. So as soon as that's triggered, somebody else is up and ready to roll. And they take over literally mind and body. And consciousness, so that the consciousness is somehow pushed out of the way and there is an amnesic period until and if, and only if, that alter presents to me what took place during that.
Now, how do you define an esoteric tech so the audience is a little more aware of what you mean by that?
I'm crossing over black magic and the actual hardware, okay, and software. So in other words, you've got, let's just say, you've got a facility somewhere that has a bunch of people sitting at monitors and computers who are tapped into brain-mapped MKUltra victims out there living their lives. And there's the black magic side, which is sigils and practices that certain high-level members of those communities, whether they're corporate, intelligent, religious, are practicing to call in power, control, to veil certain situations so that people can't see what's going on. And so you've got these two things combined. The latter being age old. I mean, it's been around as long as we've been around, as far as I'm concerned. And I mean that in a civilized, so-called civilized society. The technology is pertinent to the age. Whatever age you're in, whatever time period of human history that you're in, the technology applies, but it's a combination of those two things. So it's not just a matter of a computer or an AI system. And for me personally, AI is a cross. There is no delineation. That's entities and technology combined in a way that will never ever be able to be separated once again. So if you've got an AI system, you've already reached it. You know, that is the ultimate control, because you've got the beings living through the technology. So did that give you kind of a good idea of?
Well, yeah, and I want to add a few things. I recently read a book on AI by a computer guy. I don't remember the name of it. I could get it, but then I'd lose my train of thought. But it's important to know that he says in there several times, and he is not a proponent of AI run anything, particularly on a national level, which of course they're considering. They're considering having that, and I'm writing a book about the space fence, and I'm going to talk about how that will be an AI-run system, well, totally global. So he says several times, I was amazed that software engineers who set up the AI systems in these supercomputers, and there are many supercomputers, not just one or two, they are amazed that at a certain point of the programming that suddenly they don't know what's coming up and they don't know where it's coming from. I mean, it is completely a grab bag of consciousness on the part of the AI. We tend to think of our machines as doing what we tell them, but not with the AI stuff. Oh, no, it takes off. And this is why this fellow who wrote the book says, do not think that this AI is going to be good and do what you tell it, because we already see that it goes its own way. And it could even, he says several times, wipe out humanity if it's a matter of the AI's survival and power. So when I think of AI, I immediately think of Satanists. I think if there are real Satanists, yes, it is not some sort of Halloween thing. And their use of fire, air, water, and earth for many centuries to evoke these beings that now ride the technology in, because what is technology? It's fire, air, water, and earth. I mean, it's this is nothing new, and that's, to me, the crossover of black magic. You can do the rituals and call them in, but even relationship with them will call them in now. Mm-hmm. It does not need to be a formal rite, whereas at certain points now that the veil is falling, it really is. And Rudolf Steiner, I'm a student of Rudolf Steiner, he talks again and again about how the veil between the worlds will collapse in the 21st century. and that this will be the time we will have to be on our toes to be able to name evil and really know it for its nature and give it a name, because otherwise it will just take us by force. And to be so close, I mean, that's why quantum physics has arisen, a language that perhaps can help us to understand what lies on the other side of the veil that is now pouring into our world. And to me, this is not at all a stretch. I know that materialists have a hard time with this, but if they could just remember that their very materialism is conditioning and programming, we have got to open up to what we are in relationship with in this life. And we've got to be able to see it for what it is and not allow ourselves to be chanted to sleep. And this is my hope. So when Elisa said, these beings are writing the tech, I totally get it. I mean, we still don't know what electricity is. Electricity, what is it? You turn a switch, boom, it comes on. It's an anode and a cathode, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, you've got all the little names, and you think by naming it, you know its nature? I don't think so. So to me, it's a matter of retaining an openness of spirit and intellect in order to see the world that is opening before our very eyes. And it's going to be a world of marvels. And you can imagine, Mike, how happy the black magicians at the top of the scientific pyramid are to be alive now. You can imagine how they'd be willing to pay just about anything to see where this goes.
Yeah. It's interesting. I read the Satanic Bible way back when, and I remember Anton LaVey, one of the topics he covered is, whether Satanists would spend their time, bending spoons. He said, we would never waste our time doing something like that. We spend our time shaping consciousness.
Yes.
We spend our time getting what we want and imposing ourselves on the unknowing, on the profane. So I found that to be very, very interesting. People see stuff like that and they just chalk it up. It's just nonsense. But, when you read stuff like that, there's a lot of tidbits of information that you're going to pick up, and it helps you to connect the dots and put the puzzle together.
And if they think humanity is so low, why then are Satanists and other black magicians of other persuasions in every religion in the world, why are they so bent on controlling and sucking human beings dry? Why do they want their babies?
Yeah.
Why? To me, the human being is a work in progress for one of the highest beings in this universe, because we are intended to be free will beings. And even the angels serve us. So how can we be so low? And when people constantly blame humanity and boo, boo, hiss, and the poor earth, the earth and my humanity are so merged. I love the earth. She loves me. We are beings involved in a tremendous experiment and adventure of free will. And the fact that some human beings, I guess they're still human, take over and destroy and derive a great deal of pleasure from destroying and evil, this is simply my battle. It has nothing to do with convincing me that the nature of the human being is not worthy of the greatest of efforts here.
I agree, Elana. Very well said. Very well said. Now, let me ask this question here. Going back to the black magic, Elisa, were you ever privy to a black magic ritual? Is there anything that's in your awareness?
Yeah. And being, but again, in fragmented pieces, often in a drug state. It appears, things are coming in a fuzzy way. I can't make out faces, but very group situations and mostly male, where there's some heavy sexual element where I was being utilized in that way, which I think the sexual energy was a big part of a lot of the black magic ceremonies. Where there, like I said, there were drugs. Seeing that I'm laying on, some kind of table or stone, flat piece, seeing off to the side, my head's turned. I see this very old, in one case, I see this very old pitted gold bowl. I remember later thinking how old it felt. And, being poured into that was human blood. It wasn't mine. And there was also, which I found interesting later, it took me a while to identify this, but monatomic gold was in there as well. There were quite a few men in the room, and I was kind of going in and out. Other ceremonies where other people were being sacrificed. And that was when I was adolescent. I remember one in particular where a young girl was being sacrificed. So a variety of things, almost always involving, in my case, human blood or someone's life being taken, or a lot of sex.
Young children, right? They take the lives of young children. My understanding is, in my research, is that the energy, or they believe the energy from young children is extremely powerful to them.
Yes, and I've heard the same, and I've had a lot of difficulty with coming to any memories regarding that. Yeah, but yeah, you hear it a lot from a lot of survivors, that infants. And what I've found is, for the entities, both the entities in the room involved with the men and women that might be present, as well as the entities, as I talked about briefly in the first radio broadcast, the entities that were inside me, that were, the first line of handlers, controllers, and programmers, that some of the memories have shown me that as far as a life force goes, they'll take any age. And it is an absorption at the point of death by the entity. It is an absorption of that life force. And it is an amazing thing to be in a body that you have an altar that is doing that. And to feel all the sensations that entity that is running your altar feels. And that has been brought back to me on more than one occasion in deep deprogramming.
What do they feel? Is it like a euphoria?
Total. Very malicious, very extremely dark, and orgasmic is the word I would use. Literally orgasmic to take that energy on. So yes, there's an innocence and a purity of youth that I think is very specific to very particular black magic ceremonies, but the life force in general. So, if you look at an area where there's a war going on, lots and lots. I used to see over Iraq just a black cloud of a feeding frenzy of entities. I mean, it almost makes me cry every time I think about it, just having an absolute orgy of feasting on death and mayhem and just mutilation, all of it. So yeah, they're very into these entities that I know. And, I want to just say one thing in regard to that with the AI that Elana said about AI not being good. There isn't a good AI that I'm aware of. There is no such thing at this point. I'm not saying that's something that couldn't have been in a different scenario, but in this one, there is no benevolent AI.
Well, let me ask this question. Now, might be a little off topic, but folks listening to this are thinking, wow, this is a lot of really heavy, dark stuff. Where's the forces of good in this equation? Why does it seem that evil or dark has the upper hand and they're just going to ride that to their end game? Where are the forces for good? How do we respond to that?
Well, I'd like to say on that all the programming and conditioning we've talked about for on and on and on progressing, that has taken place has really pushed the spirit and the humanity, as we were talking about earlier in this show, has pushed the spirit and humanity out of the conscious mind of individuals. We've become a group think without even knowing it. And for me, what has changed is that this is, at one time, this is how my highest self relays it to me. At one time, we had the group ability to shift things. In other words, we talk about the 100th monkey, right? If you have enough people, the majority, then it will shift it for the rest. It'll shift it for the whole. My understanding is that time has passed. We no longer have that as an option. That's a limitation that was forfeited due to perhaps, I don't know, not exercising it in a certain frame of time, in a certain progression of events. What we're down to now is the individual recovery of our true human spirit, soul, consciousness on an individual basis. And that's a very, very powerful thing. But it's that, and this is just the way it's been presented to me. And this was shifted, this loss of group
soul.
Group soul. That's a great way to say it. Was for me, my understanding is it shifted in 2012. That there was a lot of work being done up until that point to get us ready for whatever that window was. Now, I'm not a big 2012 person. I never was. People used to come and ask me, what does this all mean? I said, I have no idea. Go ask somebody else. But in 2013 and the early part of 2014, I, through a year and a half, began to see and feel things differently. I watched this shift. And I, in hindsight, with my higher self, realized that this actually took place in 2012 at some point. Not a particular day that I know of or any even reason that I can give you, but it has been taken away. And we are now in a very touchy period where it is the individual who has to reclaim that peace for themselves. Share the news, talk about it, be open about it. And that is, in my experience, that is what happened for me. And I'll be honest with you, Mike, I knew it was possible for a very long time. And with everything that was done to me personally and what I did with it, all these altars and under the programming, I was uncertain as to whether when I leave the body here, would be intact enough to not be involved or still accessed by these dark forces. And it has just been in the last couple of weeks, something very particular happened, and it was made infinitely clear that that I am not captured by them any longer, that what I call the recycling program that has been going on here on Earth under this dark force isn't the true reincarnation program that, old school would teach us. We have a very limited recycling through darkness. People die and don't leave the dark forces and just come back and do more time here. And it was shown to me that without any doubt that I have the ability through what we just talked about, which is a daily ongoing activity and choice in consciousness. It doesn't happen once or twice or, just in the mornings or just on a certain day of the week. It's all the time that I have the ability. I was shown this. I experienced it is the way I would put it. I experienced it, body, mind, and soul, that I can break out when I'm ready of this, this realm of darkness that's being contained. And beyond that is the true force of creation, the true force of unconditional, magnificent love, the true, I don't know if you'd call it progenitor of the human soul and spirit as it used to be and as it could be on an individual basis first at this point. But that's what lies beyond that. And I'm not a religious person at all. I have a lot of issues with most religions, but I would have to say if I wanted to step outside of benevolent, unconditional, creative love, if I were going to name it, I would call it, the closest thing would be, and these were the words, living Christ, a living Christ energy. I have no relationship personally with Jesus or any lords or masters or gurus. What I have a direct conscious relationship with through my highest self is what I would call a living Christ energy.
Elisa, your story is very powerful because it's an example of how somebody can break away from that darkness and move their soul and their spirit to where it needs to be, which is with the light. And so to answer the question I asked before, from my own perspective, is that the good is here. The good is within you. The goodness is going to work through your efforts. It's going to work through your awareness of who you are as a human being, your consciousness. You have to do your inner work.
Yeah.
There's not going to be anybody that's going to come along and bang you on the head with a magic wand and just make everything just grand. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and you're so right, and it's hard work, Mike. I mean, it's like the work, it's the last thing you want to do. Let's put it that way. It's like what it requires on a daily basis is where you don't want to. You want to go somewhere else where it's pleasant and pleasurable. And the reward is things that I can't even put into words. Sensations. I get teary-eyed. Sensations and knowings that cannot be expressed in words.
Yeah.
So there's this struggle, this immense struggle. And I'll tell you this much about it was that this was just recently, and I was in a tremendous amount of pain. I still deal with a lot of physical pain, and I was at one of my peak points with it. And I was not sure that if I left the body, where I would wind up. I've always wondered with everything. And that's how this began. And I got very focused. I focused on my breathing, and I got very focused on love and where that would take me in word and in thought. And I had a very particular gentle way of, and deep breathing. And this began to open to me. And there was no question, there was no doubt of what I experienced on the other side. And the darkness, by the way, during this experience kept trying to push its way over this to block the view I was getting beyond it. The sensation and experience of connecting with the living Christ. And it kept trying to cover it, and it would fade. It wasn't stronger. My higher self connected to the true source is stronger. And I've known that in theory. You've known that intellectually for a very long time, but on a personal basis, I was uncertain where I would go, and now I know where I can choose to go if I exercise that right. And the other side is still true. I could conceivably still choose a lot of dark things. It's not going to happen, but that is still, so there's still always, as Elana said, there's that free will, there's that choice, but it comes with responsibility. It's not just handed and then everything's good to go. It comes with tremendous responsibility and diligence. And I would say perseverance is huge. So anyway, thank you for letting me get into all that. I know it sounds I feel like I'm on a soapbox, but I'm very, very passionate about it.
No, it has to be said, and what you're saying is absolutely true. Now, I was going to ask you, Elisa, do you have moments where you have struggled still with the programming?
I would say most of my struggles, not with the programming so much. I mean, it things trigger it off all the time, but it's like I'm in charge. So, and I've been in charge. The highest part of me is in charge. So I kind of observe that, with that highest part of me, that it's really not a struggle. I would say most of my challenges come with the entities themselves, that assert themselves in certain ways at certain times, and can catch me in a very relaxed state. And I wouldn't say I have trouble or fear from it, but I have to completely turn that over to the highest part of me. And then there's no fear. It's like I know exactly what I need to do in any given situation. Nobody's going to run the show anymore. So I would say that's my main challenge. And I assume that will, to some degree, continue, as far as, taking hits or attempted hits, to gain access to my energy for whatever reason.
How do they come to you, Elisa? How do you become aware that they're trying to communicate to you or talk to you or get you to do something?
Well, I'd say most, there's several different things. There's an actual, I use the words a lot, see and feel in quotations, because there's a visual a lot of times, but there's always sensation. I'm very, very astute at picking up either a negative or malevolent energy, whether it's in a place, in a person. It's just something I'm extremely sensitive to. So there's a sensation that goes with it. Sometimes I have to take a moment to decide whether I think I'm picking up just a technology that's laced with entities being shot out across a region, which I do sometimes. Apparently, I pick up, like scalar waves, or I'll get a visual and a sensation and record it later. Or if it's, I don't know how this probably sounds, but literally it seems as though my highest self seems to engage in mini battles on occasion. Whether I don't know how that comes about, whether it's coming to me or we're going to it. And they're just, I'm not going to get into the details, but just an occasion where, okay, it's you and me and I know who it is, and, here we go. Sometimes they win that round, sometimes we win that round. But there's no fear, it's kind of okay, until next time. So it's really very random and sporadic, and a variety of things. A lot of times it's very visual for me. I get what I refer to as windows that open. And I'm usually wide awake, conscious, but relaxed and have my eyes closed. And it can be during the day or it can be at night, and a window will open, and there will be a presentation. I've actually learned a whole lot from engaging or observing what's showing up in those windows.
I have a story to tell you, if you guys don't mind.
Not at all.
I was meditating about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was in a pretty deep state of relaxation and meditation. And as I was relaxed, there was this voice that was coming through. And at first, you're not paying a lot of attention to it. And then your awareness gets drawn to the voice, and you become aware that there's somebody speaking to me, and it's not me. And as I was there, this voice comes across, very friendly at first, and it's saying, hey, how are things? How you doing? And so on and so forth. So, and all of this is telepathic. It's within your mind. And I said, who are you? And so there was this pause. And then it says, I'm a watcher. So I said, what do you want? He says, I just want to let you know that we are aware of the work that you're doing and that others are doing. And humanity will never get out from under our control, ever. You're wasting your time. Mm-hmm. So I then said, our conversation's over. You can go now. And that was it. And like that, he was gone. Mm-hmm. So I thought to myself, if you really had that much power and you really had the upper hand, you wouldn't be coming to me telling me that you have the upper hand, right? You would just go about your business and let me go waste my time.
They need your complicity, Mike.
Exactly. I just want to relay that story because, many times people will listen to this stuff and they just think it's some kind of weird science fiction tale that we're telling, that this doesn't really happen. And I can tell you that in my own life, I've had many experiences where I became very aware that our existence here on Earth is nothing like how we've been taught and told that it is, that the aperture is much, much wider
Yeah.
than the average person is led to believe. And, I want to ask both of you this question. Do you look at the situation that's going on here? We're all doing the same type of work, trying to raise the vibration, get the planet to a better place. Do you sometimes look at it and think to yourself, you're on the outside looking in, that you're really not a part of this, that it seems so surreal, that you feel you're engaged, but you're not engaged? In other words,
We're both kind of laughing here because, yeah.
it's almost like you're watching a movie and you go, God, is that place screwed up? So you're going to continue to do the work that you need to do to push the ball forward and to make progress and get humanity to where it needs to be. But I want to ask both of you that question because I think that to myself all the time, and I would like to have a sanity check.
You go first.
Yeah, but for me, it's a little different in that I'm standing at my post, and I'm a real soldier. I have been for many years, and I had some screwed up problems that I needed to fix so that I could really stand at my post. And I've been doing that now for over 20 years. I don't know that I can improve humanity. It's kind of like I'm just standing here, and the winds are buffeting me, and I feel for many people, I have a tremendous empathy for people's pain and their bewilderment, and whether they're a young soul or an old soul or whatever. For me, it's just there are many battles and the war is long, and I guess I just feel like I do this every time I'm here. Every time I'm here. And I have memories from 2,500 years ago. That's about as far back as I can go. So I'm I'm going to head out of here in I don't know how many years, and then I'll be back. Me and Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. Nobody's getting rid of me very easily here.
Good for you.
So then Elisa now, because she calls this the world of man. So I know she feels a little outside of it.
Well, it's interesting because, I always have, due to I lived in a different world, so I never felt I even have younger memories of as though I was observing what those were doing around me to try and understand it. And of course, a lot of that came out of tremendous dissociation. I really did not understand at times what were they feeling about this. I had to work my way into, why would someone choose that? I intellectually understood it, but then I would try to figure out what was motivating them, what was, because I had a very dissociated life. So it really wasn't until I began so it was always the world of man around me. There was all this stuff going on, and I lived in a completely different world, which in truth, I've come to find out I did. There's a parallel covert world that I was born into and raised in. So it's really not inappropriate for me to call it another world because it is. But as I began to get connected to consciously a relationship with my highest self, which leads me into, those other realms, then it's become, I have an amazing empathy and connected to humanity and Earth, but it's on a grand scale. It's not on an individual one. I meet people I adore and think are just beautiful and lovely, and I'm so glad to have had time with them, but it's not difficult for me to move on to the next place or situation. So it is a different view. It's not a really a personal sense view. I don't have a lot of personal, I interact with people on a one-on-one basis, and we connect and we become friends and all that, but it's so much bigger than that for me. So really, I would say, I don't I don't have any beliefs that I can save humanity. I'll tell you that. I do believe it's, as I shared earlier, it's very much an individual experience that if the individuals choose that, we will come into that group connection again, the real group connection, not the one world government connection or the singularity, but the true unity comes out of the individual journey and the individual reclaiming of that. Because I've seen it happen, like my association with Elana. I mean, we were at like two, very distant places, and we were brought together. And I, now being up here with her for a little while, I can see how this is how it works. If you do your part, then the people who are doing their part. And so to me, the unity is a byproduct of the individual's reclamation of their true humanity. And so what's going to happen, I really personally believe it could go either way, because it is about our choices and our free will. And we can choose not to do anything on a mass scale. So for me, I look at it as, like her, I've done this many times over. I don't look at it so much as linear as a circle. I'm living many lives of mind control and servitude in one capacity or another in many different ages of humanity's time. And this one was, for however that comes about, was for me to say enough. I'm out. And how I wound up in all this time and in all these different situations is another story to be told. But this one is about no more. You don't have my soul or my spirit anymore. So the rest of it can't happen anymore.
Let me ask this, Elisa. What recommendations would you have for other MKUltra victims as far as how do they work through the process? How do they get themselves cleared out? How do they get themselves better, and how do they make the break like you did? So if you had to put a parameter around where to start and what to do after you start, what would you tell them?
I'd say there's two really important parts, and I'd say the first most crucial part is you are going to have to develop a relationship, a conscious relationship with that higher part of yourself, the highest, truest part of who you are. And, people will say, well, how do you do that? I mean, where do you go? I find that people who ask me questions, the first thing I'll tell them is, first of all, the questions you're asking me about you and what you should do, you are the only one who truly has the answer. So in other words, if there's information you need about yourself, if you need to form a relationship with your highest self, the only one that's really going to be able to do that with support, that's always good, is you. So, if you're uncertain, ask those questions. Just be sure to, in my case, I always say, just be sure to always address benevolence. In other words, that's a great word to use. I'm addressing the most benevolent, highest part of myself, the truest part of myself connected to, unconditional creative love. And I'm blocking off and cutting off all access by malevolence or negative forces. Something along those lines to start that process. But ask your highest part, your truest human soul spirit to form a relationship so that you can start to get clarity, so that you can start to understand things. Simple physical things, journal everything. Even if it seems irrelevant, write it down. If you need to make it cryptic, that's fine. Put dates, put times, put what happened. Just put a few words. It doesn't have to be a story every time. If it happens at night, write it in the morning. If it's happening during the day, carry a small journal with you. Get a hand recorder. Just say it. And one of the things I'm extremely grateful for is the man that really stuck it out with me said, don't censor anything. Record everything. It's not going to make sense now, but I promise you, and eventually it will. And he was so accurate on that point. I can't tell you how many times over. So recording, starting to develop internally a relationship with something that's safe and unconditionally loving, And it's challenging. It's very challenging at first when you start to realize not only the things that were done to you, but the things you may have been involved in. It's hard not to live through shame and guilt and just keep putting that aside and going back to that love, that unconditional love. It's really helpful if you can find someone that you truly, truly trust that will just listen to you. They don't have to figure it out. They don't have to have the answers, but just someone, some way to record it and bounce it off another human being. The person I worked with listened. It was rare that he told me what he thought was going on. It was usually only if I asked. He just listened and encouraged me to keep going. And that's a big burden. I get that for someone to do, but you can ask that, ask that highest good to bring that person into your life and make it evident for you. There's really there's no easy way through this. None. It is part of the soul's, the dark night of the soul for someone to come out of an MKUltra program. And it's going to be a difficult journey, but to remember that human soul spirit is stronger than any of them. The entities, the programming, the programmers, the intelligence agencies, the military, the religions, the corporations, that truest human spirit does have sovereignty if you take that sovereignty. And you have to be very intent on that. You have to really focus that I'm exercising my divine sovereign right to come out of this, to break free of this, to abolish all promises, covenants, oaths, binds, contracts, because there may be many things that were done that you're not consciously aware of. And that's a really great place to start. And I would say to do that over and over. If you want to get up every day and break all those oaths and promises and covenants and binds and move into your sovereign divine right to be free.
What are your thoughts on counselors and therapists?
Well, I think there's a growing community of awareness in the field of psychiatry or psychology, I should say. I don't know about psychiatry that much. I'm sure they're out there, but I think there's a growing awareness. But I think if you're going to deal with someone, you have every right to know exactly what their experience is, what they understand about it. You should be interviewing them, not the other way around, to see what they know, because there can be pitfalls. There's things such as booby traps and triggers, so that when a victim starts to talk about certain things, it could set off suicide programs. Let me just put it this way: if you're a high level, it's going to set it off. And I had them set off all the time, but for whatever reason, my spirit was strong enough to choose to keep going. So it's important that do some research. If you're going to work with someone, find out why they're worthy to help you come through the deprogramming process. That's really the way I see it.
And reprogramming.
To reprogram. I'll let you talk a little about that.
I only know what you and others have told me, that some psychiatrists and psychologists in the therapeutic world are actually reprogrammers. And so you fall into their snare, and suddenly your talk therapy is ending up being a reprogramming of your programming. So, to trust another master is definitely not the way to go. So when Elisa says, check out who this person is, if you can, I'm along with her and others. I don't really trust authority figures very well, for good reasons in my life too. So, that it's hard to find a good therapist who understands even what programming is, though, like Elisa said, it is slowly opening up that, oh my God, there's something going on here, because I'm hearing the same story over and over and over.
And, to kind of add on to that, there's the actual programming. Someone may be able to help alleviate some of those programs that are put in. However, this is first and foremost, this is going to be about the soul and spirit journey. And if you can develop that strong enough, I am living proof that you can dismantle actual programming through that. I don't have to know every single altar's every single experience. I've been able to, in many cases, blanket certain areas and completely dismantle any ability for that program or altar or group of altars to have any effect on me. And again, going back to, this is my version of it, there is no programming that is worthy without the entities. I mean, they could put programming in left and right all they want. Without the entities, it's not going to stay intact because the human spirit is much stronger. So this has to be an esoteric job. So if we address the spiritual part of it, I'm not saying, you one exorcism and bam, you're good to go. It's a daily ongoing process. But as time goes on, it gets less and less, and your truest part gets stronger and stronger till the point where, as you asked me before, do I have program? Yeah, I have things getting triggered all the time, but there's no effect. It's like I acknowledge it and I put it away. It's done. So, I mean, for the most part, it's so to me, it is definitely, if I said, do I address my spirit or do I go to a deprogrammer? Deal with the spirit first, and your highest self will guide you and help your intuition to know who's trustworthy and who's not. Because for MKUltra's, trust is huge. We don't know how to figure out, we don't trust anybody. So early on, I had to go through that process of building my own spiritual conscious sense so that I knew what was facing me and what wasn't facing me.
Yeah, the reason why I asked the question was because as I was taking in everything that you were saying during the interview, Elisa, I'm thinking most counselors and therapists are ill-equipped to take something on like this. And because there is also a very strong metaphysical or spiritual aspect to the recovery, many of these counselors and therapists don't have a clue about that either.
And quite honestly, not at all in an arrogant way, but what I've learned over 7+ years is that we victims know more about it than any of the people we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And that's not an arrogance. It's just, it hasn't broken open on a mass scale well enough yet to be in that position. So I even wrote in my book, for the victim, just know that when you go to get some help from someone, you're going to know more about this than they are. So be patient with them because, they're learning as you're bringing them the information. So yeah, it is definitely left with the victim.
Now, we have about 10 minutes left, if you're okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk a little bit about the role that these unseen forces play? In other words, we talked about it during various parts of the interview. So what I'd like to do is clarify it for the audience with regard to what are they, who are they, what is their role, and so on.
As far as the who are they, as if I'm going to give you they come from this place and they've been doing this for X amount of years. I don't have that answer. This is the way I understand it. They go by many names. There's not just one group. There's a hierarchy within the various groups, and some are working with others and they're parasitic in nature. Some are very intelligent beings that are as opposed to, some are very intelligent beings, very powerful, as opposed to others that are just kind of wispy, energy-sucking, whatever. So there's a real broad spectrum of what I would call cross-dimensional beings that are here and leaving and coming back. Some reside here. Some have been here a very long time. And I do believe, and this is a belief because I don't have this firmly understood yet, but I believe there is something at the top of this hierarchy, someone or something that is at the top of this. Again, being able to cross in and out of dimensionally, manifesting physically. As far as, the ones that I've dealt with, I go into as much detail as I can in the book. I choose to call them, Satan, Cain, Lilith, even Lucifer. those are some of the ones that I've, in my version, had direct contact with. They were able to present different forms to me, very human looking, but I think I shared this in the first show. Even when they did that, there was, when I saw their nakedness, there was no nipple or belly button, which I found very interesting, but very human otherwise, often with black eyes, depending on, what they're presenting. And as far as, I don't know where they come from. I have some issues with stories that have been presented to us over the centuries that it seems like they're not quite 100% accurate. And yet I can't say why a piece of it I don't agree with. I just know that that's not correct. For example, I think I mentioned the fallen angel thing. I don't know what's wrong with that story for me, but I don't believe that the ones I'm dealing with are benevolent gone turned bad. I believe that my programmers are malevolent, period. So there's this sentient, various forms that directly ties into what's going on here with humanity, and I believe in the formation of AI, that it was a goal all along to bring us to this point for very particular reasons. So it's not all just the old mythology. It's a very tangible, physical manifestation in this realm at this point that they can control and interact with on an ongoing basis. They have a stronghold.
And if people don't have an inner life, they're going to only be able to be part of the consciousness of the global AI. And that should drive people beyond their comfort zone, beyond their anger, beyond whatever. They have got to have an inner life in order not to be subsumed in a global AI. That's what's coming.
No, that's exactly right. And the problem is, as we spoke about before, Elana, is most people have no idea what that means. There are so many people that are living their lives today in this very narrow bandwidth of existence on the hamster wheel, and they fully accept and embrace that this is what life is all about. And I think that's the struggle, right? Because it's to get people to understand that you need to, as I mentioned before, open that aperture and understand that it's much broader, and that as a human being, you have a much higher purpose. So, I mean, that's the work that, we're all working on, and we've got our work cut out for us. But I did want to ask Elisa this question. You had mentioned before that when you see them, they have black eyes and so on. How do you see them? Is it an inner mind, or do they manifest physically? How does that work?
Well, over the years, it's been both. I've seen it in a physical presence. I mean, I have a human being standing before me, and it turns into, not there, the eyes. I mean, there's something, the eyes are the window to the soul. So, I mean, there's actually human beings walking around that are not what people think they are. So there's that very physical here and now, but there's also the inner eye, in the windows, in the programming process, very crossing in and out of dimensions. So to me, it's again, not just the physical realm, as Elana just said. There can't be just the everyday, and you said the everyday, narrow aperture. When you open the aperture, it's a different kind of experience. It can be in the here, in the physical, in a human being, but it also can be, you're now working on a variety of levels, not just now and again. You're aware all the time. So it could be anywhere. It could be a movement out of the corner of your eye, and when you turn, it's not there. It could be you lay down to go to sleep at night, you close your eyes, and for me, the window opens, and then there's an interaction. Or I wake up, and in full broad consciousness, I look down and see something attached to me. Now, someone else may not see it, if they walked in the room. So, there's both. And I want to make it very clear that there are what look like human beings, very nice people, very kind people, walking around doing good works. I'll even say with the appearance of doing good works, who are completely consumed and have been taken over. And I would say in some cases, in one or two, they never were anything but born of this. There's some younger people I know that one in particular I know was born of this and is not what people think she is. She is an innocent in the sense that she has no idea who and what she is. But she is, what I'm looking at is AI, period. There's no soul. And so there's a variety of ways that this can present itself. But that's what I'm saying. It now has a physical, almost incarnation into our realm. It has a way in.
What you said there was very important. You said the AI has no soul. So is that the main differentiator? I know it's a huge differentiator, but between the AI and a human being, lack of a soul?
A true human being.
True human being.
So in other words, if you're looking at someone, to me, I'm not going to say that that's a true human being and that's a soulful person. That person may have lost their soul some time ago. And a lot of that is generational families where they're brought in and raised to it right from the get-go. But what I'm saying is I'm pretty sure of what I'm looking at nowadays, 20-something, is an AI completely. It is in a human body, and it is speaking AI. Day in, day out, it is thinking AI, day in, day out. And this is a person in every other aspect, but there's no soul home. There's nothing there. And to me, I know how that's going to sound. I know how it's going to sound to your listeners. Welcome to the future is now. And this is coming directly out of Black Op programs that have been up and running for, a very long time. And the technology there is way beyond the surface technology. So to me, they're already putting them out. How that process all happens, I don't know. But when I see it in a 20-something and then listen to that person, I don't think there was ever a soul there.
Well, it goes back to what I said before. We used the example of the Planned Parenthood and harvesting baby parts when somebody turns around and they were a 20-something and they just shrug their shoulders like, I don't know what your problem is, Mike. I don't know why this bothers you.
Yeah. And see, we're talking, I know for a fact that in the late 80s, there was cloning, actualized up and running cloning. Putting people out there who were clones. I know that for a fact. So we're now talking 2015, and the person I'm talking about, was born in the 90s. Who's to say that that person ever had a soul? I know what I'm looking at now, but I don't know that that person was even born with a soul. What's to say that if there's a true up and running AI that we're not at the point of what I'm looking at, which is you got a body and you've got a sweet, kind little thing spouting off all kinds of information, but I'm looking, the first time I laid eyes on her, it about knocked me over. So, and I'm not going to name it because that's just, I can't prove any of this, but I'm absolutely certain on a personal level, and Elana can vouch for me, I can't shout it from the rooftops loud enough that this is a real deal. We're there.
And can you imagine what living in an ionized atmosphere, how that is easing the delivery of these entities by making our atmosphere an antenna that is electromagnetic to the very quick, right into our lungs and into our bodies. So this is our challenge. We have to know the picture of the challenge. We can't flinch from that. We have to know what we're facing.
Indeed, Elana. And with that, we're going to have to come to a close because we are out of time. But before we do head out, I was wondering if you'd like to talk about your books. You can choose who goes first. And also any websites you might have where our listeners can connect and find out more about your work. So you guys can choose who goes first.
For me, I recommend the Sub Rosa America series for people to consider the true history of the United States since John Kennedy's assassination. There are 5 books. They're in a fictional format, and they are, I like to think of them as my rallying cry to the 60s generation that I am a member of. because they go on a trip, a real trip on Route 66, and all hell breaks loose as time itself is warped and dreamers and dead people are coming to tell them what the future holds. And then most recently, I've written The Chemtrails Harp and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. I wrote that because Adam Parfrey of Feral House asked me to write it. It has led to a whole other life that I had not really expected, in which I spend hours per day on Facebook, correcting people and giving little comments and encouraging people, trying to educate the public about this technology. And that's now I'm writing the Space Fence book, which is the next portion of the Chemtrails Harp technology that will, I like to call it, I don't like to call it, but I do call it planetary lockdown.
Okay, and when do you expect to have that book out, Elana?
The publisher would like it by spring, so I hope to write all winter.
And Elisa, you have some books out.
Yeah, I have Our Life Beyond MKUltra, book 1 and book 2. You can get it directly from Amazon. I did self-publish. And then I also have a blog site, which you can find the books through that as well, and that's ourlifebeyondmkultra.wordpress.com.
Okay, and I'm going to include all of the links for both ladies.
Thank you.
In the show notes, so people can easily get there. I want to say that this was another fantastic show, very, very fascinating, and it's going to open the eyes of a lot of people.
Cool. Well, I sure appreciate it, Mike. It's really, I feel like I've gone through a lot of rough radio shows to get to you. You've just been a real pleasure to work with and resonate with, and I thank you for that opportunity.
Well, Elana and Elisa, you can come back anytime. You have an open invitation. So I know, Elisa, that you're going to be out of pocket for a while. But, when you get settled and you feel like you want to come back and talk some more, just email me and we'll do the show.
That sounds great. I appreciate that. I will do that.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
You're very welcome, Elana, and I'll see you on Facebook.
Yep.
All right, ladies, have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. And that concludes my interview with Elisa and Elana, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to Elisa's website and her books can be found in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, Sage of Quay Radio, and you can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.